Welcome to the Claims Clinic. Why don't you have a seat and show me where it hurts? Are you feeling depreciated? Has your HCV policy left you with a self-insured penalty? Having trouble with your GPP? Don't worry, you'll be just fine. The doctor will see you.
All right. Welcome. This is Andy McCabe. I am your claim doctor. I have the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Patrick Kelahan again today. Patrick is a customer service engineering and insurance professional working with insurers, attorneys, and owners. And he works for H2M Architects and Engineers. This is a newer job for him. This year or late last year. He's been in the insurance field for a very, very long time. And for everyone watching this on YouTube, I'm showing his LinkedIn profile right now. So I'm going to stop that right now. Come back to Mr. Patrick. How are you, man?
I'm well, Andy. Yourself?
Doing well. Let's refresh everybody real quick. A little bit about your background, how you're associated with the restoration industry.
Sure.
And then we'll get moving with what I think we need to talk about today. I think we had an agreement. We'll figure
Yes, we did. Yeah, working backwards, as you said, I'm coming up on 1 year with H2M Architects and Engineers. And the work I do with them is I interact with our forensics team members, but I also work a lot with insurance companies. I actually touch base with restorers, mitigation vendors, other engineers and such. Prior to that, almost 20 years with Allstate Insurance, but before that, the U.S. Small Business Administration traveling on disasters.
Perfect.
Swung a hammer for 4 or 5 years building stuff.
Yeah.
Worked in retail for a long time. So I've been a customer service person forever.
Perfect.
All right. And when I was with Allstate, though, I did a lot of work before Alacrity and those companies started up, trying to establish some uniformity across our claim office with understanding psychrometrics. That was before that phrase even was a cool thing. We actually made up our own charts before Dry Ease got into it. So I was immersed in that because we wanted to build some uniformity so that everybody made a nickel, but not a nickel and a penny.
Not a nickel and a penny. I get it.
Yeah, so I've been involved with it for a long time, but really the customer service piece has been the common core all the way along.
Perfect. So not to get too far down a rabbit hole, but Allstate was trying to figure out a vendor program before a TPA came along and said, hey, let me take care of your vendor program, that sort of thing?
Yeah, in the New York Property Claim Office, we had established some somewhat uniform rules, just trying to make some sense out of it all.
I got to assume that most major carriers were doing that right about that time before the TPAs came to dominate us. Well, good. It's great to have you back again. Thank you for coming.
Sure.
And let's talk about H2M and what you do and the rise of not third-party administrators, but third-party experts and consultants. We're seeing more and more of those. I actually had an email exchange with one today on a major loss I'm working out of Atlanta. This particular forensic accounting company was going through the books and saying, no, we don't owe you that much money for rental reimbursements. According to our calculations, and for those of you out there in radio land, I'm giving some air quotes. According to our calculations, we owe you X. And so we were going back and forth. But at that point, I am not dealing with an adjuster. I'm dealing with somebody who's not a licensed adjuster, who's not a true party to the claim, but they're this retained expert. So why don't you give us a grand overview of how that works? How does that play in to the claim environment, and why are we seeing more and more of them nowadays than we used to?
Yeah, well, obviously engineers have been around for a long time. Mold, asbestos, cause and origin, fire investigations, environmental stuff.
Oh, for sure.
But in an insurance policy, the carrier covers an insured's direct physical loss, right? So how do you determine that? Everybody's got an opinion of what direct physical loss is and then exclusions. Everybody's got an opinion. But the person with the most qualifications or the most letters after their name, if it goes to court, often is the person who carries the heaviest weight of I don't want to say it's legitimacy, but weight of reputation.
Yes, sir.
So engineers have been around forever, but at this point, H2M, no different than any other, what is being seen is as intellectual capital vacates the insurance world, and you have a lot of new staff. That's my dog barking in the background.
That's
so
right. That's right. Not that
like,
bad. Not bad.
As you get a lot of new folks into being adjusters or even being restoration vendors, you've got questions of, all right, is it covered? Is it not covered? So at the outset, an adjuster might say, I'm not sure about this. I just don't have the experience to know if a retaining wall fell or if a roof is damaged because of whatever reason. So an engineer would be called in.
Okay, so let me pause real quick.
Yeah.
And repeat something you just said. Intellectual capital has left the claims department. That means we used to have folks that knew how buildings went together and they could figure out these problems on their own. And we don't anymore because we don't, for a myriad of different reasons, we have a different population coming into becoming claims adjusters.
Right.
Okay.
There's no question. And it's the migration of a claim adjuster typically goes, you get hired as an inside adjuster and you get some experience at a desk, and you may come right out of college and not really have much. And insurance carriers try to train, but you can't train somebody how something goes together unless they either experience a lot of it being damaged or they've done it themselves.
Yes, true.
Right. So it's tough, and not casting any stones at anybody. It's the reality of life.
It just is what it is.
It is what it is. And in the adjusting world, things are learned over time. So no matter what you do, you could hire someone, you train the heck out of them, but in a year, they're not going to learn. You could have the best training ever, and in a year, you're just not going to know.
No.
So the engineering world, forensic engineering, becomes more and more prevalent in its need because adjusters are not fearful. Their concerns are, am I making the right call? Or I want defense on my denial.
I want backup. I want
backup. And again, it's not because they're being bad or anything, but you've got the contractor, the restorer, whoever, the customer on one side saying, yes, I believe it is. And the adjuster saying, no, I don't. Let's get an expert in.
Yes.
And the engineering work isn't going to be hired necessarily because the customer wants it. They're going to be hired because the insurance company's looking for that backup. In fact, the customer could say, I want you to hire me an engineer as an alternative opinion, but the insurance policy doesn't provide that benefit. The carrier has that because they can investigate. It doesn't.
Why doesn't it?
Direct physical loss only. It's the wording. We pay for direct physical loss.
Do we need to get legislation? I've got an idea for legislation, but I won't interrupt you. Go ahead.
Let's bring me back to that point, because I'm not taking a position for or against the insurance company or against but there are ways to go about it.
Yes.
So really, the prevalence of engineering assignments increasing is, I say, due to the vacation, if we can use that word, vacating of intellectual capital in the insurance world.
Okay.
I don't want to say it's fear of litigation, but the trigger gets pulled a lot on it. And I'm not going to complain because I work for an engineering company. Call me every day. We'll send someone to your house.
Yes, we will, because we bill by the hour.
Right. And of course, as catastrophes become more and more severe, and as we've all seen over the last couple of years, then there's going to be more and more need for it in those environments. Is it flood? Is it wind? Every time there's a heavy hurricane, flood versus wind is going to bring a lot of experts in. So
absolutely.
Also, you've got, and not to interrupt because I can see you're saying, there is regulation and laws being passed for controlling how environmental effects are monitored, asbestos, mold, and now it's even silica, how it's handled. So more and more of that happening causes insurance companies to have to often by law gain the work from an engineering company or a forensics company to assess that.
On that point, what do you say to the carriers and desk adjusters who are saying, well, we don't owe for that testing. We don't owe to pay for asbestos testing?
Well, in the state of New York, and that's where I live, it's a requirement that anybody who is disturbing material has to have it tested, or they're assuming liability for whatever goes on. It's an absolute straight up law.
It's contractor based. It's not insurance. That has nothing to do with insurance.
It's got nothing to do with it. It's a separate law. The labor code of the state laws say you have to test it.
Sure.
So if you're, say, not in the state of New York, and there's going to be other states that have asbestos requirements, and the carrier says, we don't owe for that, and they don't know for sure that it's asbestos containing material or not. Is it like lead where you say it's an incurred cost? Is it material that most probably before the years 1978 had them in it? You know, heavy sprayed ceilings, mastic, 9x9 tiles. How are they going to estimate the damage if they're not including all of what they know is most probably damage? And that might go towards that bad faith
Sure,
situation.
Bad word.
It's damage that they know should be included in the estimate, but they're not addressing it. So what do you say to them? You say, come on, this is 9x9 tile. We know it's asbestos carrying material. It may not be friable, whatever, but it's really got to be included. So push comes to shove, I would recommend all vendors include it. And if the carrier doesn't, they're going to have to deny that as part of the claim.
They're going to officially. They're
going to have to, in writing, deny it. And at that point, it's either litigation or in some states, you can take that to appraisal. Florida and Louisiana, for example. So there's no pure answer to that. It's, come on, you take the guy aside, you put your arm around the shoulder, say, come on, you know.
Look at this.
Yeah, you know that this is asbestos. Or are you going to assume the liability?
Yeah. And that's the tack that I propose. And as you know, and as hopefully most of my audience knows, I've been running this rabble rouser group called the Restoration Rebels for a couple of years now. It's amazing how many times I've seen come up in the threads of our Facebook group that we have a desk adjuster saying, well, you can go ahead and test for asbestos, but if you don't find any, we're not paying for the test. And I'm like, that's just not right. That's just not right. So, okay.
Yeah. You build the case for what the material is. You don't want to just, if you're not in a state that requires it and it's drywall and you don't know for sure, you can't press every issue. But if it's 9x9 tiles or if it's that heavy sprayed ceiling or that type of stuff, you got to include it in your estimate.
I don't know that there's a state that doesn't require it at this point.
There may not be, because OSHA says you've got to protect your employees.
Sure.
EPA's got certain regulations. So the more information you have that shows the desk adjuster, whoever, that there is a requirement for it, you include it. At minimum, you have to tell the carrier, include a line in there. If it's incurred, it's part of the claim.
Yeah, it's got to be.
Right.
Perfect. And yeah, let's not go too far down the asbestos.
No, and I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm not insurance person, loyal or customer, because the damage is the damage.
The
I am
structure
loyal
speaks
to
for
the
itself.
damage.
Yes,
the
sir.
structure speaks for itself. I am loyal to the scope.
Yeah.
All right. I agree on the scope.
I do know any structure, Washington State, any structure built after before 2016, you have to test now, because there was a big there's been a lot of imported drywall from China,
Right.
which contains asbestos, and then the mud contains, it's not necessarily the drywall, it could be the mud. It's just a mess.
Well, any restorer that comes in and starts doing tear out before they know for sure, they are just exposing themselves in a way. They're taking it on. They own it. And we're not talking $2,000 consequences. This is typically, you start to toss the dust around, and now you're cleaning the whole house. And,
and then someone screams at you. You expose them. Forget about it.
Yeah, the liability is huge. So there you go.
Back up a little bit. The legislation. I've been thinking, if a carrier is going to hire all these experts and incur these, it's a claims expense at that point. It's the cost of
claim expense, not part of their coverage limit.
Not part of it. I believe that it's not unreasonable to write into the legislation, the insurance for the legislation, that whatever the carrier spends on an expert, the homeowner should be able to get an allowance to spend the same amount to level the playing field. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say, I guess the undertone of that, Andy, is that the feeling then is if a carrier hires an expert, the carrier is doing it to the engineer's doing it to the benefit of the carrier. That the feeling is that the work is being done really to the carrier's benefit.
Yes.
I would counter that gosh, the damage is the damage. The assessment is the assessment. And I can only speak from H2M. We go out and it's science. You look at it, it's science. The roof is either a condition of X or it's not.
Mm-hmm.
You don't build your report to try to lean towards verbiage from an insurance policy. Although I've seen it many times.
I've seen it many times this year.
Yeah. So if there's a prejudicial preparation of a report, you got to raise your hand and say, come on.
Yeah.
I can't say they're all going to go out and be loyal and all that stuff and just empirical. So whether or not you get that legislation through, that I can't be sure. But in reading a report, if it's prejudicial, the customer or the vendor's got to raise their hand and say, come on, you guys are killing me.
Right. 3 times this year, I had to have a client hire their own engineer to develop their own engineer's opinion on what actually happened. Because the carrier's pet engineer, and I'm not speaking H2M here.
No.
You guys are stand-up individuals, and I get that. But certain carriers, it's the same engineer every time. I see him in town. I'm in Bend, Oregon. It's a small town, so I see the same guy, and he gives the same report. And it reads something like this. Oh, yeah, the roof is damaged. Oh, no, we don't think that the cause of damage was X. So your statement of loss, you submitted, Mr. Insured, that you said the ice lifted your shingles, and now they're all bojangled.
The seals are broken.
The seals are broken, and they never sat. It's been a summer now, and they never sat down. They're still crowned up, and this engineer says, okay, yeah, those shingles are damaged, but I don't think the ice did it. Well, okay, but it's conjecture. It's conjecture, not yes, these are damaged. Either damaged or they're not. So it's really hard.
One thing is for certain, if you read a report and there's a lot of pronouns in it, your roof, I think, then it's going to the land of someone's opinion as opposed to someone's understanding of science or facts. I mean, really,
Thank you for saying that, Patrick.
I mean, it's true. It's even when you negotiate an estimate, by the way, and I'm going to throw this in, leave pronouns out. My estimate versus your estimate. The damage shows, the estimates show.
I'm writing that down.
Pronouns should not be in negotiation or in scientific assessments of anything, because you've got to put the work between you and whoever you're working with.
Leave out the pronouns.
Leave out pronouns. But big carriers often will rotate between RIMCAS, EFI, whoever, so that they're not getting the same deal. If you've got someone who's always doing the same thing for a carrier, that's just a a lawsuit coming down the road at some point.
Can you speak to the Hurricane Sandy debacle and the FEMA debacle where they had to reopen 30,000 claims based on biased engineering reports?
Yeah, the Superstorm Sandy, there weren't actually 30,000 claims that had biased reports, but there were a lot of them. But
sure.
what FEMA
there
did,
were enough that they reopened all of them.
FEMA said, look, we're uncomfortable with these. So the conclusions of the engineers were changed by the carrier. We're going to look at this pool of claims, not only from what ones that engineer did, but also what some carriers did. And there were carriers that really did some unsavory stuff.
Sure.
And it turned into 30,000. And same thing happened after, what was that big one down in Louisiana? I've got a mental block on it right now. No, the one that hit New Orleans so bad. Katrina, yeah. Katrina was terrible stuff. There was a high prevalence of just wind versus water and things being written in a way that the carriers wanted to see it. Most carriers learned from that. The ones up in New York, they don't see hurricanes that often, so they stepped on their you-know-what a little bit. And so, yeah, that does happen. And any carrier or restorer, anybody who's dealing with a lot of claims, has to be aware of what am I seeing? What's the general tendency I'm seeing of these reports? If you see the same boilerplate stuff.
Yeah. Copy paste.
Yeah, look at the work you do. If you go to a catastrophe, you're doing a lot of claims.
Mm-hmm.
The tendencies could be, oh man, how can I get these reports written easily? Boom, boom, boom. The damage repeats. Engineers are humans. Adjusters are humans. Restorers are humans.
We'd like to be more efficient. Yes, we are.
We want to be more efficient. You're going to start cutting and pasting. But an engineer can't do that because the coverage determinations can be based on very specific observations at a site. There's got to be a paragraph in that report that's really detailed to that house.
Tell me about the technology you guys use to analyze losses and come and develop. Well, tell me about what you do. What does H2M do?
All right. Well, above and beyond designing sewage treatment plants and buildings and all the huge stuff, the forensics group, we do everything from if there's an oil spill, doing ground samples and determining restoration plans, to simple things like, gosh, we need some asbestos samples from room A, B, and C.
Oh, okay.
So let's take an example of a cause and origin. Roofs are a good one.
Okay.
Is it hail damage or is it just old?
Yeah.
Look, my gutters are full of all of the little ceramic bits.
Granulars.
All the granules fell off. Look, the hail did all of that. All right. Well, it may have happened during the hailstorm, but it's not necessarily happening because of the hail. All right. But the one you spoke of, the ice damming.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we have a ton of ice damming claims in New York State, same as where you guys are. Most often, ice damming doesn't cause damage. But if we're called on one, we're going to go out, we're going to set up, we're going to look at a big sample of ice, of shingles along the eave. We're going to see what do other shingles look like in non-affected, say, a rake edge, versus it's really looking for the cause and looking for what is not the cause. All right, so on an ice damming, you can't use a drone necessarily to do that because you got to lift the shingles up. Thermography is the best way when it's happening. You know,
when it's happening, though, but
when it's happening,
you're not getting up on a roof or above a roof.
But if you're called a month afterwards, the sheathing may still be damp.
Sure. Okay.
All right. So doing some thermography from inside the house, you can see the patterns of where the water infiltration is. Where was it the worst? Where, customer may have pictures of where the biggest icicles were. You've got to look at all the evidence that's being presented. And if you've got, often it's rafter tails that get broken.
Yep.
From weight, shingles. You've got to collect all of these data. And it's like a private investigator looking at a house trying to recreate the scene of the crime.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of highly technical stuff that you can do to figure out if a shingle is damaged because of it. But if you see the only place the seals are broken is along the eave where there's ice, and they're the worst where the worst ice was, one can suggest, particularly if there's tears in this where the seals go together, that this was caused by the pressure of this ice. Now, my personal opinion is ice damming is not sudden, never has been, takes time to happen. But the insurance world says it's a covered loss. So the techniques we use always are predicated by what is the stuff we're looking at. If it's a fire investigation, there's a ton of information that you go in. There's equipment. There's you might even get a dog that comes in. There's a collection of evidence that you send off to labs. Again, thermography is an important piece of that because depending on if you're there soon enough, the water patterns from where the firemen were putting stuff out. Chemical assessment, getting electrical engineers to do investigation of how the wiring has reacted to where the loss is, because an overheated receptacle is going to look different under a microscope than one that's just exposed to fire.
Sure is.
So if the fire starts at a receptacle because of a short circuit or something, it will look different. So there's whatever you're looking at will tell you what materials you need. If it's asbestos, obviously you send it to a lab to test for the many types of asbestos. If it's mold, you could be doing air traps. You could be doing swipes or swabs where you pull them off. Visual inspection. There's all types of things. So I wouldn't say there's one method you go in. It's a matter of the person knowing, what do I need to know to understand how something got from A to B?
Yeah.
We don't try to be adjusters ever.
Yeah.
Some engineers do.
Looks like we've got a couple people watching on the Restoration Rebel Facebook page. Michael Ray says he's going through this right now. And he said, State Farm's engineer told me that the modular we have a claim on is his first ever to assess. Good luck with that, Michael. You got a first timer out there. Ivan Turner says, leave out the pronouns. That's a humdinger. It's so true. I like it. Good. Well, we got an audience here.
Yeah, the first time. What a great chance for that restorer to say, it's your first time. What can I help you with to better understand?
How can I help you understand?
How can I help you understand?
Absolutely. Michael, write that down. Go out there.
It's non-threatening. You're not saying, is it law covered or not? What can I do to help you understand what's going on?
Perfect.
That adjuster's going to smile and say, thank God.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the restorer can help him with some technical details, he can document his file.
Document his file better. And that's what we're talking about. We're just documenting the file. We're making the stack higher. The higher the stack, the happier the adjuster. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah, an adjuster won't or shouldn't care where his best information is coming from. If the information helps support his coverage determination, it doesn't matter what source it's from.
Yes, sir.
Because it is what it is. The damage is what the damage is.
So you guys must have like an army of engineers across the country.
No, well, we don't. We'd love to be across the country, but we're mostly the Northeast.
Okay, okay. For now.
But if you need something in Bend, Oregon, man, we'll fly out there and take it.
I know you will.
But no, we wish we had as many things going on as we need in our. We have H2M's about 400 engineers and scientists, so there's a pretty good number.
Wow, that's of size, but that also speaks to the breadth of things you guys can analyze and look at. I mean, you look at everything from asbestos to structural. There's a big swath in between.
Yeah, a high frequency is we have water damage in our basement. All right, is it coming through the foundation or is
what's the cause?
What's the cause? And at one time, you'd have a 25 or 30 year experience adjuster who could say, based on what he sees, says, look, here's what's going on.
Yeah.
It's not the case anymore. And that's why engineers, and I can't say every engineer that goes out has the exposure for all of that either. So it's a learning thing for all the players, all the participants in the insurance affecting world.
So we touched on it briefly, but let's go a little bit deeper. How should restorers, which make up the majority of my audience, how should we approach these outside experts, not just engineers? We're talking about forensic accountants and everyone else. Let's leave the other contractor out for now. The competitive bid. Here's the air quotes again for you in radio land. The competitive bid contractors. Let's leave that off the table for now. But how should we approach third-party experts and how can we better get along with them to help our process?
I would start before the third-party expert is engaged in the claim.
All right, tell me about that.
Something along the line it causes some disagreement in what scope or extent of scope is.
Okay.
All right. You don't need an expert unless there's something that needs to be explained.
Okay.
So right from the outset, as you're walking through a loss with an insured or with an adjuster, if you get full agreement on scope, you'll never see an outside person.
Okay.
If the carrier wants to hire one, what is driving that need? What disagreement is causing that to be something the carrier wants to do? The carrier doesn't want to spend $2,000 or $3,000.
Right. Or what gap in
what
expertise?
What gap in expertise?
Okay. I'm getting
so
it
again,
now.
if the adjuster says, "Oh, I'm not really sure about that," we're going to call an expert to take a look at this. Again, you can say, "Is there something I can help you with to better understand where I'm coming from? Can I show you some technical information? Can we visit the house? Can we show you some things?" Try. If you have more experience than the adjuster, you need to be a helper to that person.
It's an educational opportunity.
It's an educational thing because calling an expert in is cycle time grows. There's an expense to it. Often the expert comes in because the vendor, the restorer, and the carrier adjuster start to butt heads. And there's a little tone of anger.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So keeping things.
We don't get mad. Come on.
How about, I've seen 8,000 of these. The whole neighborhood has a damaged roof, and you're telling me this one roof isn't? And the adjuster says, "Well, I am saying that, dang it, and I'm going to call an engineer to prove you wrong, you son of a gun."
And then boom, boom, boom.
Every time you butt heads, you're going to get an expert probably.
Well, I'm working a claim right now. I'm going to reference back to this apartment 10-unit building in Atlanta. I didn't even have the claim yet, and a JS held guy had already been called out, and a forensic accountant had already been retained. So what does that tell me? I'm going to say that tells me this adjuster that got this claim had no clue, or no intention to visit the property. One of those two things. Maybe he's a really good adjuster, but he's doesn't have time or he's not going to get on a plane and go there. So
he's fearful. He's fearful.
Exactly. Okay. So where do you see the JS held? I mean, I hate to use their name, but JS held.
Whole bunch of good people work for JS held.
Yeah, sure. And there's other guys out there. What's another construction consultant we can name?
Engel Martin is
Engel Martin, right? Well, okay. So this is an Engel Martin adjuster that hired JS Held on behalf of Lloyd's of London. But it was like all this happened. All these guys were already involved, and then I got the claim. I'm like, well,
now you're not acting as a public adjuster on it, right? You're acting as a restoration guy.
I'm acting as the construction consultant on it.
Construction consultant. Okay, so the customer said, "Look, Andy McCabe, you're my construction consultant. Yes. I need you to be my advocate on all these things."
Yes.
But there's not a public adjuster's agreement, which doesn't matter one way or the other. So they contact all these folks. Typically, your smartest move is to speak with whoever's going to be doing the expert investigation and say, "Hi, I'm Andy McCabe. What is it that you what is it that we need to accomplish on this thing? What is the damage? What is the scope? For example, the loss of rents or whatever. Let's agree that there's 32 apartment units. The loss of rents is for 6 months. The amounts and rents are X. What part of that do you also need to include? What expenses do you need to back out of that aren't continuing? Having that frank discussion of what methodology that person's going to use instead of waiting for the report where then you say, oh my God. Mm-hmm. So really, it's incumbent upon you to have that conversation to get the full scope of what that person's going to do.
How does a restorer get a hold of that person?
Well, it's
my experience. Well, in my experience, and specifically on this case with this forensic accountant, I wasn't allowed. I didn't have access.
What does wasn't allowed mean?
They didn't want to talk to me.
If the customer that you're advocating for says, look, you're doing this for me, whoever the primary carrier is, somehow along the line, the customer's the one who's got to demand it. And that's not always the case. Customers sometimes just, I don't even want to deal with this.
Yeah.
So when it's a case where they just won't talk to you, I don't know what to tell you there, Andy.
Yeah. In an ideal world, we have a good conversation with.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Boots on the ground with a person.
It's no different than walking through a damaged building.
Yeah.
With the carrier, you're virtually walking through the accounting of this loss of rents or whatever you're working on.
So the unfortunate reality is we got to unwind this whole thing now.
Yeah, when the accountant presents his information, is he presenting you all of the data from which his conclusion is coming from, or is he just saying it came out of a magic box? It's $13,475.
It's a little bit of he's being a little bit obtuse, and we can see where their numbers came from, and we already, not to go too deep into this one, we already came back and said, okay, we see this, and here's all the stuff you left out, so here we need another.
Yeah, this is heading down the road of appraisal for the loss.
I think it's that's
because at the time of appraisal, then he's got to show everything, because the appraiser's going to come in and say, all right, I'm going to look at it differently. Appraisal for a commercial job can get a little bit expensive, so maybe that'll scare them.
Very expensive. Well, JSL came in at $450K. We're going to be at $1.2 million.
Is that just for the loss of rents?
No, the loss of rents is ancillary. It's going to be 30.
Yeah, so you've got you've got bigger issues than.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, when it's that big of a difference, that's like, I don't even know. That's crazy numbers.
All right, let's reel it in. Let's bring it back to you, Patrick. I got to say, since we got hooked up last fall, I forget when it was.
Yeah, sometime last fall.
We did our first interview on the Claim Clinic. I've been watching you, and I don't know if I'm following you or you're following me around LinkedIn, but some of the stuff you're putting out there is just pure genius. So if you guys in the audience, I'm speaking to you guys and girls, if you want to learn something if you want a deeper understanding of how our industry works, you need to get hooked up with Patrick on LinkedIn and just read, just follow the knowledge and see how things go. Because every time, Patrick, I'm just going to inflate your brain a little bit, inflate your head a little bit here. But every time I read one of your posts, I'm like, wow, that's profound, or that's deep, or that is connected at such a different level than what we're used to seeing. You've got a great perspective on things. And I hate to admit that I agree with you on some things that I'm like, oh no, I don't want to agree with you, but he's right. He's right. So it's not always going to be in my favor or the restorer's favor, but you're right. You back to the structure. The claim writes itself. This is not a creative writing exercise. Leave the pronouns out. It's just a perspective.
I dealt with, and thank you for all those comments. I'm not sure they're warranted or not, but I'll leave that to you. I was a claim adjuster before I was a claim manager, before I was I never took a claim to appraisal.
Wow.
Ever.
Wow.
Because you get in, you look at it, you agree, you educate each other. And there were a lot of public adjusters who knew a lot of cool stuff. There were a lot of vendors who knew a lot of cool stuff. And you can't have an ego so big that you can't learn something on every claim.
Sure.
And that's really the key. And once you agree on scope, the money always works out. It just does. You start with Xactimate, you start with our estimating system, and then you tweak and you move and you know, who was it? David Herring, maybe he was talking about labor burden and having to walk up to the 12th floor of a building. And
I haven't watched that video yet. And yeah, side note, David Herring has a great video series on YouTube right now, so look it up.
He does. And that's the stuff you learn from. And you say, well, yeah, that's true. This person's going to have to go up to the 12th floor. I'll give you a perfect example. In Manhattan,
Oof.
every claim essentially doesn't matter how many dollars has to have overhead and profit, because every building has a super, every building has a doorman, and every building has a freight elevator, and every building has rules that say you can only work between 10 and 5, and you've got to go this way and that way, and you can't get parking. You have to understand this stuff.
Your efficiencies drop dramatically.
It drops dramatically. And the same thing, it's in every jurisdiction, there's some little thing that's like that. And you just have to be, there's no absolute rules. And that's part of the problem we have of getting, of new persons being in the industry saying, I must fit this into what I need to get my work done. There's no adaptation. And that's when push comes to shove, oh, I don't understand this. We call an engineer, we call whatever. And I'm not disagreeing, because I want all the engineering assignments that we can get. But if a restorer understands that is the fear of the adjuster, is it doesn't fit a pattern that they can comfortably work within, try to educate them.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with them. And if you get to an adverse situation, you got to back off, because it'll never end up right. Who has all the power in an insurance claim? It's not Andy McCabe.
No, it ain't.
It just isn't. Or anybody else listening in. It's ultimately the carrier can choose to piss off the customer.
Yeah, they can.
And just write what they will write. And it doesn't get your work done. So try to be the helpful person. I mean, I can't say that enough.
I like that. Education removes the fear.
Education removes fear.
Yeah. Well, that's a great opportunity. And I think we'll end on that. How can people get a hold of you, Patrick? How can people ask you questions?
Best way is drop a note, hook up through LinkedIn.
Let's do that.
If they send a message, I don't think I've ever not responded to what you needed.
Sure.
I'm a person who's been around a while. I want to help everybody out, because that's just the way I am. I'm not the smartest guy going, but I've been around.
Love it.
I'm just not the smartest guy going, but.
Well, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attitude.
Yeah.
Let's get H2M some business out of this. Yeah, wouldn't hurt my feelings. I know it wouldn't hurt yours.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that, even though we're not nationwide, that we do. Estimate reviews. If a carrier says, look, our mold estimate is correct, yours is wrong, we look at those things. There's a funny thing on whether somebody maintained heat or not. If you've got heat records, we can do consumption analysis. How many times have you had a claim denied for a customer because they didn't maintain a reasonable temperature?
More than I liked, but
is it based on empirical data? But is it based on someone really assessing? No, straight up.
No, I can safely say I've never had it empirically proven. It's always been, well, yeah, we walked in and the thermostat was set at 40 degrees. You know?
But is that reasonable or not?
I don't know.
That's the question.
Yeah. Well, when it's below zero for 14 days and you set your interior temperature at 40 degrees,
that doesn't make much sense.
You're going to freeze pipes. That's an easy one. Open and shut.
Mm-hmm.
But that's very.
What if it's set to 55 and the customer is in San Diego for a month, and 55 is pretty good. That keeps my house, but they've got all their doors closed, and the corner bedrooms where the hydronic heat is, all the elbows pop because it's not circulating.
Yeah.
Is that reasonable or not? Are they maintaining heat? We won't get into that, though.
I'll leave that to the engineer.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Patrick, thanks again.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Good to talk to you, and we'll be in touch. Be in touch on LinkedIn.
All right, man.
Good luck
Thanks,
out there.
Andy. Take care.